All right, so the fight over redistricting is now spilling into college sports, with critics arguing the same states profiting off of black athletes are also working to weaken black political power. The NAACP this week launched its Out of Bounds campaign, urging black athletes and fans to boycott the SEC. That is the powerhouse conference that dominates college football and generates billions of dollars across the South. Joining us now is Jemele Hill, contributing writer for The Atlantic and host of the Spolitics podcast. Jemele, it's great to have you back on the show. In your latest piece for The Atlantic, you write, quote, big-time programs in the South have shown that they are willing to spend to have a top program, and asking young athletes to resist the allure of that money will require more than wishful thinking. What would it actually take for this movement to become real pressure instead of just symbolic outrage, and how long would it take? I think a lot of athletes, student athletes, have probably already committed to these universities for the next year or so, and this real-world impact of gerrymandering and diluting black power in the South is happening right now.
Yeah, the timing isn't great when you look at the college football schedule, and in terms of when recruits decide when they commit to schools. And, so in that case, that this is maybe a few months further behind schedule than it probably should have been. But just like with anything else, all it takes is examples and support. And while you don't need 90% of players to do this, you don't even need half of them to do this. I think if you get 3 to 5, maybe even 10 players who make it known that they're not going to attend the schools that the NAACP has targeted, then that in itself becomes encouragement, not just for the other players who can do the same thing, but also for the fans. The one thing about the NAACP's plan is that this is not all just on the athletes. Like, they laid out a pretty multi-pronged plan that includes fans not buying tickets to games at these schools, not wearing merchandise, not buying any new merchandise, pulling donor support. So it's not just the players, but also the fans and even the alumni as well, because a lot of these places that are mentioned, from LSU to Ole Miss, they have pretty powerful alumni that are black athletes. And so I think the NAACP, they also want to encourage them to tell their schools, hey, we're not going to give you any more money. We're not going to come back and have you showcase us to other players, to lure other players there. We're just not going to do anything or pressure you to make statements that prove that you're on the right side of history with this.
Jemele, what do you know or what do you hear might be happening behind the scenes with this? Because, often Americans misunderstand how some of the iconic moments and sort of heroes came forward in the civil rights movement. I mean, they were recruited into certain actions. They did trainings before they sat at counters in whites-only restaurants. I mean, it really takes coordination and effort here. And people don't just wait for someone to raise their hand and say, oh, I'm ready to be the face of something as momentous as this could be if it were really to take off. Do you have a sense that there are lawyers getting together, that there are organizers who are actually starting to have conversations with athletes and their families about what this would mean?
Well, I definitely get a sense of that last part you mentioned. One of the NAACP's, one of their sort of missions in this, and certainly a pathway they intend to follow if they're not following it already, is that they want to get to the parents and talk to them and engage them and help them understand what's exactly at stake. They also talk to a number of current and former professional athletes about the best approaches, about how they can message this when they're sitting there talking to parents and athletes themselves in a way that will make them feel as if they have power here and they can do something. And really, they do have some recent examples that are on their side that they can point to. I mean, one of the players that I recognize in the piece I wrote for The Atlantic is Kylan Hill, the former Ole Miss running back. Ole Miss, or the state of Mississippi, rather, they were, continuing to fly the Confederate flag or use a Confederate emblem on the flag. And he made it known a few years ago he would not play for Ole Miss if they continued to fly that flag. And that wound up having a reverberating effect, and Mississippi came up with another flag. And we have seen how athletes, when they step into their power, young athletes, just how they've changed the system already with name, image, and likeness, with schools now being able to pay players directly. They've already proven that they have a tremendous amount of power. And I think the NAACP, their mission is to get them to understand that power and how they could channel it to do something that could really change the scope of politics.
So why go to student athletes as opposed to professional athletes to, stick their necks out on behalf of this cause?
Well, as we've seen from the civil rights movement and previous movements, young people are really the lifeblood of a lot of these movements. I mean, John Lewis, the great humanitarian, a great voice, a great legislator, excuse me. I mean, he started being an activist when he was 19. I believe when the Montgomery bus boycott happened, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was 26. So a lot of young people were freedom riders. They were the ones at lunch counters. They were the ones waging sit-ins. And so I think this is their way of trying to get them to understand their power and the fact that they've always had this power and have been leaders throughout. Now, that's not to abdicate or absolve the people who have money and leverage already from their responsibility. Again, I think part of the NAACP's mission here is to make it a multi-pronged attack. And I do think it would be really powerful and meaningful if some of the athletes, the professional athletes that play in these states, if they would also in lockstep with the younger players or even lead the way. Because, of course, if you see players that are making money, if you see them begin to upset things politically, it reverberates and it spreads. And so all it takes is one or two. And then next thing you know, it becomes something that people start to see as feasible.
Jemele Hill, thanks as always for your time tonight.
Thank you.